I'm Liam Halligan. For the next hour, we'll be talking about fuel, energy and fuel prices as retailers warn of petrol and diesel rocketing, wait to it, to over £2 a litre. And household fuel bills more than doubling to around £3,000 a year. On the Money's here to explain this rise in the cost of living, providing tips to help you beat the squeeze. But first, it's the GB News headlines with Rhiannon Jones.
Thanks, Liam. It's 1 o'clock. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. Russia's defence ministry claims its forces have captured a strategic aerodrome outside Kiev and landed paratroopers in the area. As Russia's invasion advances on the capital, NATO and the UK have been told not to deploy troops to Ukraine. That's the message from Armed Forces Minister James Heappey. New images show the Ukrainian National Guard on the streets of the city this morning as gunfire was heard near the government quarter. Overnight, residents sheltered underground during missile strikes. The UN has warned up to 5 million people could be forced to flee abroad. Speaking in the Commons earlier, Mr Heappey warned NATO against military escalation.
We will explore all that we can do to support the Ukrainians themselves over the next few days, but we must all in this House be clear that British and NATO troops should not, must not play an active role in Ukraine. We must all be clear what the risks of miscalculation could be and how existential that could very quickly become if people miscalculate and things escalate unnecessarily.
Meanwhile, President Volodymyr Zelensky said current sanctions on Russia aren't enough and demanded effective counteraction from its international partners.
This morning, we are alone in defending our country, just like yesterday. The most powerful forces in the world watch from afar. Have yesterday's sanctions persuaded Russia? We see in our skies and feel on the ground that they are not enough.
Well, speaking to GB News earlier, Chair of the Defence Select Committee, Tobias Ellwood, says we must stand up to the tyrant.
This is all a wider picture which points to the fact that we've been asleep at the wheel over the last 10 years, that we don't have a Russia strategy. We don't have a way to wean ourselves off our reliance on what Russia provides. And as long as that is the case, it's going to be very difficult to change Russia's behaviour.
That as US Secretary of State Antony Blinken spoke out about the possibility of Russia invading beyond Ukraine.
Is it a possibility that Putin goes beyond Ukraine? Sure, it's a possibility, but there's something very powerful standing in the way of that. That's something we call Article 5 of NATO. That means an attack on one member of NATO is an attack on all members of NATO. The President's been very clear that we will defend every inch of NATO territory. I think that's the most powerful deterrent against President Putin going beyond Ukraine.
And the Russian Grand Prix has been cancelled as a result of the invasion of Ukraine. Formula One confirmed that in the last hour. It was due to be held in Sochi on September the 25th. And that follows UEFA's confirmation this morning that this season's Champions League final will no longer take place in St. Petersburg. Instead, it's been moved to Paris. The Kremlin has said it regrets the decision by European football's governing body. The showpiece event was set to be played at the Gazprom Arena in St. Petersburg on May the 28th. And in the UK, rape victims are being continually and systematically failed by the criminal justice system. That's according to a prosecution watchdog. A lack of cooperation between police and prosecutors and poor communication with victims is being blamed for cases taking an average of 2 years to come to trial. 3 former Minneapolis police officers have been convicted of violating 46-year-old George Floyd's civil rights in June 2020. The trio were all charged with failing to provide medical aid when Derek Chauvin held his knee to Mr. Floyd's neck for 9.5 minutes. The 46-year-old's murder by the police officer sparked racial injustice protests around the world. The UK's COVID-19 vaccine rollout has been praised by a public spending watchdog. That's despite millions of doses being wasted. A report from the National Audit Office said delivering jabs early helped save lives and reduce serious illness and hospitalisation. Despite confirming 4.7 million vaccines were wasted, the report says the number was much lower than initially expected. It concluded that the operation had been a good use of public money. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens, but now let's return to Liam and On the Money.
And coming up on the money today, petrol retailers are warning of £2 a litre on the forecourt as global oil markets respond to this escalating Russia-Ukraine conflict. Grain traders in East Anglia, they're in a frenzy as wheat prices spiral, bringing home, in a literal sense, the impact on fuel and food prices of this battle for Ukraine. Western leaders want to impose tough sanctions on Putin's Russia, but as the cost of living spirals, their options could be limited, given Russia's pivotal role in global food and energy markets. In the next hour, we'll be talking to fuel specialists, energy experts, GB News viewers. How high could your bills go? And what can you do about it? As ever, I want your questions, solutions, ideas. What do you think of the issues raised in today's On the Money? Email gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet @gbnews. I'll read out some of your messages later in the show, so stay with us. This is GB News on TV and DAB+ digital radio. I'm Liam Halligan, and you're on the money. Now it's wall-to-wall media coverage of this Russia-Ukraine conflict. What's that got to do with life here in Britain? You may think, understandably. But check this out. East Anglia's grain traders face a frenzied day as invasion sparks new wheat price highs. That's the latest headline from the East Anglia Daily Times, a paper based in Ipswich, in Suffolk. Wheat prices have rocketed to new highs as uncertainty stalks the commodity markets after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. There's fear in the markets now, said one grain trader in Suffolk. These price rises, unprecedented. Russia and Ukraine between them account for almost a third of the world's wheat exports, much of that being shipped from the port of Odessa in southern Ukraine, a key region in this conflict. As this conflict intensifies, global supplies not just of wheat, but corn, maize, sunflower oil, a whole host of basic commodities are under threat. And that story of the East Anglian grain traders in a panic and the resulting ride in food prices speaks volumes. This conflict has cost of living implications for all of us. Now, for my money, the immediate impact will be felt on fuel prices. And the RAC is also reporting petrol and diesel prices are now well over £1.50 a litre, much more in some places. And retailers warn now of £2 a litre for petrol and diesel if oil prices continue to rise. As this military battle hots up, wholesale gas prices have spiked around 30%. In April, average household fuel bills are due to rise from around £1,300 a year to almost £2,000, as that Ofgem energy regulator's price cap is lifted, as regular On the Money viewers and listeners know. But industry insiders now warn that as gas prices on global markets soar further, the UK energy regulator could raise the household price cap again this summer, with bills jumping from around £2,000 even as much as £3,000 a year on average. This war, it is happening far away, with grave implications we should never forget for thousands of soldiers and countless Ukrainian citizens. But the impact here on the living standards of millions of UK households too will be real. So as this conflict escalates and the politicians and diplomats clash, we're discussing the battle for Ukraine. What are the costs for you? Now, Ukrainian officials have reported that Russian military forces have seized control of the atomic power plant Chernobyl. Yes, Chernobyl, the site of the nuclear tragedy in 1986. Chernobyl's about 80 miles north of Ukraine's capital, Kiev, and some are suggesting this provides a path for Russian troops into the city. Here to speak about the takeover of the partially mothballed power plant and the UK's energy strategy generally as oil and gas prices spike, I'm joined by John Lindberg, Public Affairs Manager at the World Nuclear Association. And in the studio, throughout On the Money today, Iona Bain, friend of the show, founder of the Young Money blog. Great to see you here as ever, Iona. John, tell us what's happening at Chernobyl as far as you're concerned. Lots of viewers and listeners will be aware of the disaster in the mid-1980s when the Chernobyl power plant had a reactor meltdown. It was a huge event. There is still some nuclear power generated at Chernobyl, is there not?
Thank you, Liam, for having me on. No, so the Chernobyl nuclear power station ceased operations in the year 2000 when the last reactors came offline. And since then, we have seen that the power station is being thoroughly decommissioned. Both the 3 reactors that did not suffer the consequences of the accident in '86, but also the cleanup operation and the decommissioning of the damaged unit. And this is a process that has been ongoing ever since 2000.
And as we enter into this conflict between Russia and Ukraine, it's clear usually arcane subjects like global oil markets and wheat prices, they're becoming front page news, aren't they? Because it's impacting our cost of living across the Western world. Do you think this is going to urge governments in the West, particularly the UK government, to speed up its provision of nuclear power? We have many nuclear power plants in the UK. They're quite old. Many are being decommissioned, but we're not building new ones very quickly, are we? Do you think that could now change as this conflict between Russia and Ukraine, John, focuses minds?
I mean, I definitely think that's the case, because the conflict is definitely giving an impetus to reconsider where do we actually get our energy from. And whilst in the UK we only have a very small proportion of Russian gas, the picture is obviously very different across the continent. And I think this conflict will definitely sharpen minds as to looking for alternatives when it comes to especially reliable and cost-effective baseload generation, which is the niche that nuclear energy obviously plays really well. So I definitely think that we're going to see governments definitely speeding up nuclear power expansion as a result of the very tragic events that are currently ongoing in Ukraine.
We're seeing pictures as you speak, John, of that Chernobyl plant, the fairground attraction frozen in time. A lot of the industrial area has been taken back by nature, becoming fields and so on. Very, very iconic pictures. How has it happened, John, that the UK, which was a pioneer in domestic nuclear power, at the end of the 60s, we had more nuclear power than the whole of the rest of Europe put together? We seem to have fallen behind, don't we, in this country in terms of our nuclear provision. It's less than a fifth of the energy that we use. It could be a lot more, couldn't it?
It certainly could. And the reason why the UK's energy policy has perhaps not been as inclusive on nuclear as one might have wished for is the fact that there takes a lot of political will to invest in nuclear. You need to give markets the reassurance that here you have an investment that is going to last you for maybe 80 years, and you want to know that you're going to be able to use this investment for as long as possible. And I think sometimes in the UK, historically, the problem has been that we have perhaps not been as clear when it comes to our nuclear commitment as we might have wanted to. And then we have the role of fossil gas. Fossil gas has been relatively cheap, but as we are looking at climate change becoming increasingly a source of concern, we need to find ways of decarbonising, and that rules out fossil gas, and that's why nuclear becomes so important in the future energy mix.
John Lindberg's linked two issues together there nicely, Iona Bain. The idea of the move towards net zero environmentalism and the need for fuel that isn't fossil fuels. A lot of environmentalists think, don't they, that nuclear could be part of the answer. As a relatively young person compared to me, do you think the sort of image of nuclear is changing among your generation?
I think it is. There are certain issues that we haven't managed to address with nuclear yet, such as nuclear waste. So it is not flawless by any means as a means of clean energy provision. and it requires a significant amount of investment, and it takes a long time to build these plants. And we're now discovering that actually, if we'd have started investing maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago, we would be in a much better position now as we face this crisis, given that the West is buying so much gas still from Russia. And I mean, we as a country don't get that much gas directly from Russia.
It's one global market, though.
Indeed.
For me, this idea we only have 5% of our gas is from Russia is nonsense, because
it's irrelevant.
If the French and Germans didn't get their bit, we wouldn't get our bit. It's one global market.
Which is one reason why, at the moment, it's very difficult to imagine the UK alone having a great impact on Russia in this conflict, because actually it's up to the West to decide not to buy that oil and gas. And we've seen President Putin has already said, I don't want ordinary Americans to feel the cost of this conflict. I don't want it to hit them in their pockets. So you have to wonder, are these sanctions really going to be effective in the long run then?
Ina Bain, stay with us. John Lindberg of the World Nuclear Association, thanks a lot for your input. We look forward to speaking to you again soon in the future. Let's broaden the discussion out now to fuel prices in general. I'm joined by David Fife. He's the chief economist at Argus Media. That's an organisation that specialises in information about oil, gas, commodity prices. Great to have you with us, David. And Ruth London, the founder of the Fuel Poverty Action Group, and of course Iona is still with us. Ruth, let's start with you first. We had some numbers out from the government yesterday, I'm sure you saw them, saying that 3.1 million households in the UK, that's around 1 in 8, are now under what's called fuel stress, where their fuel bill is a disproportionately high share of the money they must spend. But some campaigners have said that the numbers, the real numbers, are even higher, and that's before the implications on household energy bills of that off-gem price cap rise coming in April. And then on top of that, the high wholesale prices we're seeing now because of this conflict.
That's right. And people are expecting over 6 million by the when the new prices come in April, and still more, as you say, talking about £3,000 in October. And that is average prices. That is not taking account of what a household has to pay, for instance, if their home is not well insulated, or even not draft proofed, or even in poor repair, so that the cold creeps in around the not fixed window frames. And damp, those conditions are daily life for a huge number of people, and it is completely unsustainable, not just in the sense that it is unsustainable for the planet, we have to continue to live on, but also because people can't live that way. And, well before this, 10,000 were dying every year because of fuel poverty. And now it's going to be so much more. And, our position is that we need a complete change. We don't need little scraps of money from the government that we then have to pay back later, like what's being offered. We're advocating something called Energy for All, which would mean a free band of energy, enough for people to basically keep warm, keep the lights on, cook, so that everybody has that security. And after that, people who can afford it, and some people, let's face it, have done very nicely in the past 10 years. Some people can well afford it. Those people should pay more, and that money should come from a windfall tax on the companies which have been, making a bomb, really, making a killing on these raised prices, and from withdrawing fossil fuel subsidies.
Seen huge profits at BP and Shell, haven't we, over the last year, Ruth? I'm sure you spotted that, and I'm sure you also spotted yesterday it didn't make many headlines because of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Centrica, the parent company of British Gas, their profits also doubled. This discussion is exactly what On the Money is all about. We got Ruth London here talking about fuel poverty, and now we turn to David Fife, who is chief economist at Argus Media, a commodity price specialist. David, commodity prices, it strikes me, have come off a little bit this morning as the initial shock of this Russia-Ukraine conflict is sinking in, but oil's tested $105 a barrel. There's concern it could go much higher in the weeks ahead.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, amid the uncertainty yesterday, clearly that drove prices sharply higher. I think what has been quite important is that both from the Russian side and indeed from the Europeans and the Americans, both have said that they're going to try and avoid any disruptions, either through sanctions or for cutting off supplies, And so the market has taken a degree of comfort today by those statements that there's no plan politically to target energy exports. And, you know, we should bear in mind that throughout the period of the Cold War, actually, you know, Russian supplies of both oil and gas continued to flow into Europe without any really material disruption, despite the sort of political differences that occurred at that time. So the market has taken a little bit of comfort from the statements from both sides.
That's exactly right, David. A point well made about supplies continuing during the Soviet Union. For my money, that's why Europe won't throw Russia out of the SWIFT international banking payment system, because they need to settle those oil and gas contracts. On the other hand, though, the Russians these days, they can sell and do sell quite a lot of their oil and gas to China, but we'll come back to that. Iona, back to you. We heard from Ruth London, very powerful testimony. It strikes me that in April, as we face this cost of living triple whammy, you and I have discussed many times on the money, higher inflation, higher national insurance contributions, higher fuel bills, maybe even higher fuel bills now. The government is going to have to do something more.
Yeah, it's going to be politically intolerable for people to see their energy bills going up by, you know, some of the sums that were thrown around yesterday. I think David made a very good point that at this moment in time, we just don't know whether or not those more outlandish figures will be proven right or not, because it is based on current wholesale gas prices. And a lot of water could go under the bridge in terms of gas prices over the next few months, and Ofgem are going to look at gas prices over several months before it comes up with the next price cap. I think we can almost certainly say that it will go up again. And this energy aid package that the Chancellor came up with recently, I mean, we've spoken about it before, I think he's going to have to go back to the drawing board when it becomes apparent that for many people it will just feel like a drop in the ocean.
I agree, and I think the government can blame the U-turns on this conflict. I just want a tiny answer from Ruth, if I may. Ruth, you're a poverty fuel campaigner. Just a couple of little thoughts on what people can do if they're really concerned about their fuel bills now.
Well, we do need insulation, and we need other energy efficient measures. We need to switch to renewable energy, and we need a proper government fully funded insulation program. But we also need what we're calling Energy for All. And we do have a petition which has gathered nearly 250,000 signatures. It's a change.org petition. And if you look up Energy for All, you can support this fight. We believe that there's actually plenty of money. A lot of people have got very rich recently, and a lot of companies have done very nicely out of the pandemic and out of the fuel price rise. And that money has to go to support life. You know, we need a different kind of economy where what people need comes first and not profit making. That includes nuclear. I just have to mention that nuclear energy will put up the prices. You know, it's not cheap. It is an expensive form of energy compared to renewables.
Ruth London, come back on the money soon. You're from the Fuel Poverty Action Group. David Fife of Argos Media. I'm sorry we couldn't talk with you more. I'd love to have you back on the show soon. This is On the Money with me, Liam Halligan. After the break, we will actually keep this discussion going with our guests and speaking to a GB News viewer for his take on the crisis. Stay with us. You're On the Money.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGiven. A fine Friday for most of us. Blue skies up and down the country for a good few hours. Most places dry and lighter winds compared to recent days and weeks. That will certainly be a noticeable improvement, with high pressure ridging up from the southwest. Weather front staying clear for the time being, and with these isobars a bit more spaced out across the country, it's looking like a decent day. Initially fairly breezy down the North Sea coast, that wind easing, and then light winds for the vast majority. Some cloud building and one or two showers could develop in the odd place, but for the vast majority it's looking dry, at least until later in the afternoon. Temperatures of 10 Celsius in the south, 8 in the north. Then it clouds over for Scotland and Northern Ireland. A spell of mainly light rain and drizzle crosses Scotland, a few spots there for Northern Ireland as well. And the breeze picks up towards the northwest, with gales for the Western Isles and for perhaps parts of the Northern Isles as well by the end of the night. With a breeze in the north and the west, it stays frost-free, but for, say, the southeastern third of the country, temperatures dipping close to freezing, or in some rural spots down to -1 or -2 Celsius. So a touch of frost to begin things for parts of England, parts of East Wales, first thing tomorrow. Plenty of sunshine though, we'll keep the sunny skies for much of England, Wales, bright skies as well for southern and eastern Scotland. But the further northwest you are, the thicker the cloud will be, and that cloud giving a few spots of rain for mainly the higher parts of western Scotland and Northern Ireland. It'll also be breezy towards the northwest, risk of gales at times for the Western Isles, but that breeze coming up from the south, so relatively mild temperatures in the double figures in most places. Then through Saturday night, a band of rain approaches from the northwest. That will push through during Sunday, weaken, and so for many places, Sunday is another fine day.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. It's 1:27. You're on the money with me, Liam Halligan, on GB News TV and DAB Plus digital radio. We're discussing the battle for Ukraine, what the costs are for you. Rising wheat, oil and gas prices, of course, translating into higher petrol prices, and in the future, likely rises in household utility bills too. We're extending this discussion, and I'm delighted to go back to David Fife, Chief Economist at Argus Media. Thank you for staying with us. David, with all your huge knowledge, you guys at Argus Media, you're steeped in this data all day as it comes in. Tell us what's happening, not just on oil and gas markets, but food markets too, the prices of wheat and other foodstuffs.
Absolutely. Well, you know, wheat has moved very sharply higher. One of your earlier contributors noted that, you know, about a third of global wheat trade comes from Russia and the Ukraine combined. So clearly that has pushed prices up significantly higher on global markets. And really, you know, it's playing into the sort of post-pandemic narrative of supply chain bottlenecks. This is just yet another supply chain bottleneck that is raising inflationary pressures across the board for commodities. We're seeing it, you know, in foodstuffs. We're seeing it in conventional energy in terms of oil and gas. It's also worth pointing out that, you know, energy transition battery materials have increased by a factor of 7 over the past 12 months. So yes, it's hitting fossil fuels, it's hitting power, but it's also going to raise a number of questions about the pace and affordability of the energy transition going forward, because copper, battery metals, and so on have also risen very, very sharply.
So you mean a transition there to net zero, so-called, because electric cars, I think I'm right in saying an electric car uses about 6 times more copper than a conventional internal combustion engine vehicle. Let's now move on to Dave Hoddle, a GB News viewer who lives in Somerset. David, great to have you on the show. We really cherish our GB News viewers and listeners, and you are most welcome. Now, you live in quite an energy-efficient house, but you think, don't you, that this conflict between Russia and Ukraine, this focus it's forcing us to have on our own energy security, means that we should be exploring now alternative sources of energy?
Yes, we should, without doubt. I mean, the problem is that a silver lining in some ways, I suppose, if there is one, is that President Putin has picked us up by the scruff of the neck and give us a damn good reality show. Net zero is all well and good, and I'm a real advocate of clean air, but we have to take a smooth transition. And as was pointed out just now by the gentleman, sorry, I've forgotten his name, who mentioned the raw materials for batteries, etc., that in itself is becoming a shortfall issue. I mean, putting climate control acts in place where we have to meet certain targets by 2035 and 2050 is all very well, but it's not flexible, and it doesn't take account of pariah states causing disruption with energy supply. I mean, this is one of the problems with it. And there's all sorts of other things the government could have been doing and should have been doing. I mean, Rolls-Royce, for instance, are talking about, and they say it's well within their capability, micro-nuclear power stations. Now, I don't know how long they would take to commission and then at the end of life, decommission. But all these sorts of things are thinking out of the box and would have got us out of trouble if only the government had stopped focusing on net zero, important though it is, but to transition us in a sensible fashion.
I know the government has put a couple of £100 million behind that effort by Rolls-Royce to build those modular nuclear reactors. In a word, David, do you think we should raise the moratorium on fracking?
That's largely a political question. I mean, I think that the key point is that for each country, there's going to be a different pathway towards the energy transition. And I think just saying we've just got to stop investing upstream in oil and gas is a little bit naive. I think what we probably need to think about over the medium and long term, and it might include, shale oil and gas, but if we are going to be reliant on hydrocarbon fuels, as we most probably will, over the next 20 years or so, then we need to not only think about decarbonizing the fuel mix, but we also need to think about mitigating CO2 emissions. And that means higher carbon prices and the adoption of carbon capture and storage. So nuclear is part of the deal. Increased use of renewables is going to be part of the deal. Much greater fuel efficiency. But, I'm afraid for those who advocate fully against hydrocarbons, they're going to be with us for the next 2 to 3 decades. So we better think about how to mitigate economically the emissions that will come from that.
Reality check, I think, for a lot of our politicians. David Fife of Petroleum Argos, thanks for your time with us, and Ruth London of the Fuel Poverty Action Group. Dave Hoddle, do stay with us. We're going to talk to you more after the break. This is On the Money with me, Liam Halligan. We will be focusing more on spiralling fuel costs in the UK later in the show. But first, it's the GB News headlines with Rhiannon Jones.
It's 1:34. Here are your top stories. Russia's defense ministry claims its forces have captured a strategic airport outside Kiev, cutting the capital off from the west. Ukrainian military vehicles are now entering to defend the city. That as Ukraine's defense ministry claims more than 1,000 Russian soldiers have been killed so far in the conflict. Overnight, residents sheltered underground during missile strikes. The UN has warned up to 5 million people could be forced to flee the country. Speaking in the Commons earlier, Armed Forces Minister James Heappey warned NATO against military escalation.
We will explore all that we can do to support the Ukrainians themselves over the next few days. But we must all in this House be clear that British and NATO troops should not, must not play an active role in Ukraine. We must all be clear what the risks of miscalculation could be and how existential that could very quickly become if people miscalculate and things escalate unnecessarily.
The Russian Formula One Grand Prix has been cancelled, the latest sport to react to the invasion of Ukraine. It was due to be held in Sochi on September the 25th. It follows UEFA's confirmation this morning that this season's Champions League final on May the 28th will no longer take place in St. Petersburg. Instead, it's been moved to Paris. The Kremlin has said it regrets the decision by European football's governing body. Back here in the UK, rape victims are being continually and systematically failed by the criminal justice system. That's according to a joint report by the Crown Prosecution Service Inspectorate. A lack of cooperation between police and prosecutors and poor communication with victims is being blamed for cases taking an average of 2 years to come to trial. The UK's COVID-19 vaccine rollout has been praised by the public spending watchdog, despite millions of doses being wasted. A report from the National Audit Office said delivering jabs early helped save lives and reduce serious illness and hospitalisation. TV online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. We'll have a full update for you at the top of the hour. It's back to Liam and On the Money next. Don't go anywhere.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows. Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. You're on the money with me, Liam Halligan. We're still discussing how the invasion of Ukraine is impacting fuel and food prices, both globally and here in the UK. I'm joined now by Peter Smith, Director of Policy and Advocacy at the National Energy Action. I'm still with Iona Bain, founder of the Young Money blog, in the studio with us, and GB News viewer Dave Hoddle is still with us from Somerset. Let's go to you first, Peter. Peter, you've been on my show quite a lot recently because you're really focused, aren't you, on the implications of these higher fuel bills on ordinary households.
Well, it's already a devastating crisis for many millions of households. We know that the April increases that were baked in prior to this situation with Ukraine are obviously going to be devastating. We're obviously looking at a 50% increase from April for prepayment customers who are living on the lowest incomes, often the most in debt. That situation will be the most acute. And it's transpires, we think, into about 6.5 million UK households that won't be able to heat their homes. Now, hugely worrying reports are already circulating following the surge in wholesale prices about what that might do to retail energy costs in the UK as of October, and the prospect of even a £3,000 bill by the end of the year. It's true to say that this is completely unprecedented. We've never been in a situation that energy prices have got this high. And even based on just the impact of the previous crisis, the energy crisis that was prior to that, the government's response to date hasn't been adequate in terms of being able to provide the most support for people that are impacted the most. And I very much agreed with what Michael Fallon was saying yesterday, that the Chancellor's going to now need to use his budget on the 23rd of March to come back to what he said about how the energy prices need to be mitigated, and come back with a much more enhanced offer, particularly to the poorest households, to get them through this crisis.
So, Michael Fallon, you say, former Defence Secretary, former Treasury Minister, talking on the money yesterday. I'm hearing very similar things from senior Conservatives and not just backbenchers. The Chancellor's going to have to do something during his budget in the middle of March. Iona, what can households do? We've talked in the past, haven't we? They must check whether or not they are eligible for those benefits, not just the winter fuel payment, but also the Warms Home allowance. What else can people do?
Well, also, it's thought that a third of pensioners who are eligible for pension credit aren't claiming
That's right.
So it takes 5-10 minutes to check whether or not you are missing out on pension credit. Do it today, if in any doubt.
Citizens Advice Bureau also is a very good source of objective expert advice.
Well, this is true. Although at the moment, Citizens Advice are, getting so many inquiries from people. Some people are reporting delays in getting that advice. There's a lot of pressure at the moment on those organisations and on debt charities as well. That's very concerning. But you should also talk to your energy supplier. Some of them are still offering energy grant schemes. Some of them have closed now, but others are still open, so it's worth checking whether there's some extra help available there.
And also, they should grant, if you ask, a kind of reprieve, a 60-day calling-off period during which people can get their finances back on track, or try to if they're under particular pressure.
But you would need to go to a debt advisor in order to get that scheme in place. You can't just ask your energy provider for that. You would need to have a debt advisor there putting that arrangement in place.
Very useful advice. Dave Hoddle, let's go back to you, GB News viewer. I'm glad you're still with us. You seem to me, if I may say so, a pretty canny observer of the political scene. Do you think that there will be more assistance provided by government, given the political implications of fuel bills going up, not just to £2,000 a month on average, but possibly even higher?
Well, I mean, as you touched on, my home is very energy efficient. We're fortunate. But even then, our bills are going to be extremely high. God knows what they're going to be like for people with drafty properties, as Ruth touched on earlier on. I have a lovely town called Clevedon near me, which I happen to be biased towards because I was born there. But the backbone of it is Victorian housing. And it's not viable in many cases to sufficiently energy efficiency make them. They're old stone, non-cavity wall buildings. Some of them are very drafty. Some of them have had a lot of money spent on them, but you still won't achieve the kind of energy efficiency that we want. There's so many ways we can get around some of this to make energy cheaper, so that where they are inefficient, people aren't going to be out of house and home because they can't afford the bills. I mean, from the government's point of view, They can surely use the problems with Russia and Ukraine to U-turn on some of the costs they've put in place. We could have the removal of the Brexit pledge, 5% VAT. That could go. I personally think, as I said,
some of us have been calling for that for a very long time, Dave. I'm just going to interrupt you. Sorry, I just want to give the last word to Peter Smith at National Energy Action. Have you got anything to add to what Iona said about advice for individual households who are struggling, briefly?
Massive push on benefit entitlement checks is absolutely needed. We need to get that money that people are owed into their pockets as soon as possible. That would make them eligible for the current assistance schemes, but overall, the current support woefully inadequate for the current times, let alone what's coming down the tracks. We need to see more action from government.
Peter Smith, great to have you with us as ever from National Energy Action. Dave Hodell, thank you for joining us here on GB News, another GB News viewer, and Iona Bain, founder of the Young Money blog. Fabulous discussion. You've been sending your emails in throughout the show today. Paul says Vladimir Putin's done this because he knows we aren't in a position to do anything to stop him. With years of defence spending cuts and money being poured into the NHS and the welfare black hole. Chris says energy prices reportedly going even further than £3,000 a year. This is simply not acceptable, writes Chris. All these leaders making bold statements about Ukraine are insulated from the effects of sanctions and wars. It's always the working poor that bear the brunt with higher living costs. Keep your emails coming. Tell me what you want to be discussed on the show. Next week, I'm going to be looking critically at the notion of Western sanctions, the sanctions we can afford to impose given our cost of living squeeze. A real trade-off here for Western leaders. They're grappling with this problem. They want to impose punitive sanctions on Putin's Russia, but they know that there's a cost of living squeeze back home. And now let's talk a little bit more about Russia itself. Valerie Morozov is a former Kremlin whistleblower. He's now a Russia analyst who joins us in the studio. Valerie, good to see you. We've known each other quite a few years, talked a lot about Russia over the years. Let's just not talk about the military conflict. Let's talk about the Russian economy, Putin's ability to withstand any Western sanctions as they come, and the extent to which you think Western sanctions may or may not be effective.
First, I would like to raise to stress one point. The thing is that the present system, which is used to evaluate the economy in the West, is absolutely it's not working with Russia. As an example, two examples. First, when I came here 10 years ago, the difference between the prices for electricity and gas was in the UK, the price was 2 to 3 times higher.
Yeah.
At that time, it was not so important because there was a lot of export from Europe and the UK to Russia. I was importing actually GCB and other equipment.
Okay.
And the profit was there.
But now energy prices in the West are much, much higher than Russia.
In 2020, the difference became 6 to 7 times.
Yeah.
In 21, it became 30.
Yeah.
Now it is approximately 40 to 50. I don't know exactly because with these sanctions, what does it mean, this sanction? You are reducing Europeans, they are reducing the supply of Russian gas to Europe. What does it mean for Russia? Nothing, because this increased in January, 30% increase selling to China.
We know that Russia has huge foreign exchange reserves. I mean, it's not often stressed here in the UK, but Russia's got over $500 billion in hard currency. It's got a huge amount of fiscal strength.
And no debt.
It hasn't got much national debt at all. And also, it's built 2 pipelines, hasn't it? It's built the East Siberia Pacific Ocean ESPO pipeline to China, pumping oil. It's built the Power of Siberia pipeline to China pumping gas.
They agreed with Putin and Xi during Olympic Games there will be one more used pipeline through Kazakhstan.
That's right, that's right. So clearly Russia has options where it can sell its oil and gas. It doesn't have to sell its oil and gas to Europe, does it?
The most important thing, I'm not speaking about, I am speaking about the difference between Russia and the West. The thing is that in Russia, say for example, difference 50 times electricity and gas. What does it mean for the production? For producing, say, for example, fertilizers.
Yeah.
I don't know. You are stopping the production of fertilizers. You'll be buying these fertilizers from Russia. But at the same time, Russia is spending for the production. The cost of the production 50 times lower.
Yeah.
And the same in China, because Russia and Putin now signed a contract, I think, for 50 years to sell gas to China for £200.
And the price at the beginning of February, wasn't it?
Yes.
That's right. Yeah.
And the price here is 1,400.
You're extremely sophisticated observer, if I may say so, of Western politics. You hear politicians saying that they want to impose tough sanctions on Russia. Will Putin care? Will it influence his behavior?
I think Putin is using this. Actually, these sanctions, which Ukraine joined before this, a few years back, the sanctions, it actually ruined the Ukrainian economy. You know, actually, what I'm calling now is, I think that one consequences of this invasion will be Ukrainization of Europe. Europe is doing the same mistake as Ukraine. The prices up, social tension up, problems economic up, deindustrialization because you can't produce. You know, in Italy, you remember, you know this famous glass, Venetian glass. Yeah. They're stopping it. Because they can't keep the burning of furnaces.
Because the energy costs are too
and
high.
Russian businessmen are thinking, let us bring it to Russia, because it costs nothing.
Valerie Morozov, very, very interesting. It'll be interesting to stay in touch with you as the West rolls out these sanctions, tries to get some leverage over Russia.
Next time we should speak not about gas, but about another industries, because it is the same.
Very interesting. Valerie Morozov, former Kremlin whistleblower. Thanks for joining us. Let's cross now to our Home Affairs and Security Editor, Mark White. Mark, you're watching closely from the newsroom. You're bashing the phones. You're talking to lots of sources about this conflict. We're talking to journalists in the field. Where are we now?
Really, the situation on the ground has been changing, Liam, minute by minute. I want to show you some of the latest pictures we've got in from the town of Horlivka in eastern Ukraine. These pictures show a school which is apparently, according to reports from the Ukrainian government, has been hit by a missile. Now, we've seen, which we're not showing you, pictures of bodies within that school covered in blankets. You can see the damage there to the outside of the school, some further damage inside that building as well. So an indication of the growing number of civilian casualties throughout Ukraine as this bloody conflict continues. In the capital, Kiev, we'll show you another image. This is a still image as the mayor of Kiev tells us that the forces there have now adopted a defensive posture. This is a bridge in central Kiev. Those forces down on the roadway. We're told that Russian forces are about between 10, 15 kilometers north of Kiev, trying to move down towards the capital itself. There has been missile strikes in Kiev as well throughout the morning. An apartment complex, one of the residential areas that was struck by missiles. You can see that complex there. Very significant damage to that apartment complex. One, as I say, of several residential areas hit in Kiev with a number of civilian casualties, as you can only imagine. Thankfully, I think lots of people are going to air raid shelters. Many people have fled the capital because of what is happening there. The Ukrainian military say that they are managing to mount a stiff defence, that they have shot down some Russian aircraft. The footage you're now looking at is of the wreckage of an aircraft in Kiev, which, according to the Ukrainian military, is a Russian aircraft. So very tense situation on the ground, Liam. It continues to change moment by moment, and as it does, the UK, the US, other NATO allies are sending troops to their NATO allies in Eastern Europe to help reassure them at this very worrying time. You're seeing there shots of the British Army moving into Estonia. This is a second battle group, now doubling the number of British personnel in Estonia to 2,000. There are 2 battle groups and a headquarters command in Estonia. We've also bolstered troops in Poland and other Baltic countries. We are talking as well about a potential humanitarian crisis that these troops will have to deal with. Poland reporting that some 28,000 refugees so far have crossed the border from Ukraine into Poland. It is a similar situation in some of the other Baltic states that border Ukraine. Some real concern that this could be a very significant humanitarian crisis, Liam. Of course, as you know, Ukraine is a country of 40 million plus people. This is far bigger than Iraq or Afghanistan. It's a very significant nation, a very significant landmass, and a very significant war that is being waged on its soil as we speak.
Mark White, GB News Home and Security Editor, thank you for that update. That's all we got time for today. Thanks for joining me here on The Money. We'll be back at 1 p.m. on Monday with more economics, business and consumer news, more emphasis on beating that cost of living squeeze. This is GB News. I'm Liam Halligan, and that was On The Money.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern. A fine Friday for most of us. Blue skies up and down the country for a good few hours. Most places dry and lighter winds compared to recent days and weeks. That will certainly be a noticeable improvement, with high pressure ridging up from the southwest. Weather front staying clear for the time being, and with these isobars a bit more spaced out across the country, it's looking like a decent day. Initially fairly breezy down the North Sea coast, that wind easing, and then light winds for the vast majority. Some cloud building and 1 or 2 showers could develop in the odd place, but for the vast majority it's looking dry, at least until later in the afternoon. Temperatures of 10 Celsius in the south, 8 in the north. Then it clouds over for Scotland and Northern Ireland. A spell of mainly light rain and drizzle crosses Scotland, a few spots there for Northern Ireland as well. And the breeze picks up towards the northwest, with gales for the Western Isles and for perhaps parts of the Northern Isles as well by the end of the night. With a breeze in the north and the west, it stays frost-free, but for, say, the southeastern third of the country, temperatures dipping close to freezing, or in some rural spots down to -1 or -2 Celsius. So a touch of frost to begin things for parts of England, parts of East Wales, first thing tomorrow. Plenty of sunshine though, we'll keep the sunny skies for much of England, Wales, bright skies as well for southern and eastern Scotland. But the further northwest you are, the thicker the cloud will be, and that cloud giving a few spots of rain for mainly the higher parts of western Scotland and Northern Ireland. It'll also be breezy towards the northwest, risk of gales at times for the Western Isles, but that breeze coming up from the south, so relatively mild temperatures in the double figures in most places. Then through Saturday night, a band of rain approaches from the northwest. That will push through during Sunday, weaken, and so for many places, Sunday is another fine day.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate.
From all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows. Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
As war in Europe spills into a second day of bloody conflict and Western leaders struggle to stop Putin, we bring you the latest from around the world on this unfolding crisis. This is GB News with me, Alex Phillips. To discuss it all is former editor of the Daily Star, Dawn Neeson. Russian forces reach Ukraine's capital. How long before Kiev falls? Ukraine's president urges the EU to impose tougher sanctions on Russia, but will they heed his call? And the human cost of invasion as thousands of Ukrainians flee for their lives. As we report on the conflict from every angle, you can contribute to our coverage by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweeting us at gbnews. But first, it's time for the GB News headlines.
Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 2. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. Russia's defence ministry claims its forces have captured what they're calling a strategic airfield outside Kiev, cutting the capital off from the west. Ukrainian military vehicles are now entering to defend the city. That as Ukraine's defence ministry claims more than 1,000 Russian soldiers have been killed so far in the conflict. The Kremlin says it's ready to send a delegation to Belarus for talks with Ukrainian officials. Overnight, residents sheltered underground during missile strikes in Kiev. The UN has warned up to 5 million people could be forced to flee the country. Speaking in the Commons earlier, Armed Forces Minister James Heappey warned NATO against military escalation.
We will explore all that we can do to support the Ukrainians themselves over the next few days. But we must all in this House be clear that British and NATO troops should not, must not play an active role in Ukraine. We must all be clear what the risks of miscalculation could be and how existential that could very quickly become if people miscalculate and things escalate unnecessarily.
That as President Zelensky said current sanctions on Russia aren't enough and demanded effective counteraction from its international partners.
This morning, we are alone in defending our country, just like yesterday. The most powerful forces in the world watch from afar. Have yesterday's sanctions persuaded Russia? We see in our skies and feel on the ground that they are not enough.
Speaking to GB News earlier, Chair of the Defence Select Committee, Tobias Ellwood, said we must stand up to Putin's tyranny.
This is all a wider picture which points to the fact that we've been asleep at the wheel over the last 10 years, that we don't have a Russia strategy. We don't have a way to wean ourselves off our reliance on what Russia provides. And as long as that is the case, it's going to be very difficult to change Russia's behavior.
US Secretary of State Antony Blinken, meanwhile, has spoken about the possibility of Russia invading beyond Ukraine.
Is it a possibility that Putin goes beyond Ukraine? Sure, it's a possibility, but there's something very powerful standing in the way of that. That's something we call Article 5 of NATO. That means an attack on one member of NATO is an attack on all members of NATO. The President's been very clear that we will defend every inch of NATO territory. I think that's the most powerful deterrent against President Putin going beyond Ukraine.
And the Russian Formula One Grand Prix has been cancelled, the latest sport to react to the invasion of Ukraine. It was due to be held in Sochi on September the 25th. That follows UEFA's confirmation this morning that this season's Champions League final will no longer take place in St. Petersburg. Instead, it's been moved to Paris. The Kremlin has said it regrets the decision by European football's governing body. The showpiece event was set to be played at the Gazprom Arena in St. Petersburg on May the 28th. Here in the UK, rape victims are being continually and systematically failed by the criminal justice system. That's according to a prosecution watchdog. A lack of cooperation between police and prosecutors and poor communication with victims is being blamed for cases taking an average of 2 years to come to trial. 3 former Minneapolis police officers have been convicted of violating 46-year-old George Floyd's civil rights in June 2020. The trio were all charged with failing to provide medical aid when Derek Chauvin held his knee to Mr. Floyd's neck for 9.5 minutes. The 46-year-old's murder by police officer Chauvin spunked racial injustice protests around the world. The UK's COVID-19 vaccine rollout has been praised by a public spending watchdog despite millions of doses being wasted. A report from the National Audit Office said delivering jabs early helped save lives and reduce serious illness and hospitalisation. Despite confirming 4.7 million vaccines were wasted, the report says the number was much lower than initially expected. It concluded that the operation had been a good use of public money. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now back to Alex with We Need to Talk About.
I will not be diplomatic on this, tweeted the Ukrainian foreign minister. Everyone who now doubts whether Russia should be banned from SWIFT has to understand that the blood of innocent Ukrainian men, women and children will be on their hands too. He's talking about the globe's largest currency transit system, the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunications. Booting Russia out would mean they'd have to find other ways to do billions of dollars worth of deals. And it's not a move that is unprecedented. The EU did it to Iran. Why not Russia? One word: compromat. Russia is a huge buyer of stuff from Europe and its main supplier of energy. The kickback on EU economies would hurt hard, with already soaring inflation and spiralling energy costs, doubtless priced in by Putin. Add to that Germany's grotesque obstinance in stating it will never arm Ukraine and blocking other NATO members from doing the same. And we're left with a squabbling group of nations making threats Putin knows they'll never follow up. So, as tanks place Kiev in a death grip and missiles crumble apartment blocks, as thousands flee for their lives and Ukrainians are told to arm themselves with homemade Molotov cocktails, Europe's biggest grenade is locked in a Eurozone vault. A single currency meant to unite a continent, yet again tearing it apart. The crushing assault continues as Ukraine begs its neighbours for help. Let's get the latest from GB News Home and Security editor Mark White. Mark.
On the ground, they are changing moment by moment. Like yesterday, every hour that passes, we get new very sobering and grim details coming from that country as Russian forces in their thousands attack from the north, south, east and indeed the west of the country as well. The latest we have is some information about an attack by missiles on a school in eastern Ukraine. Now, this is the town of Horlivka. You're looking at the school there, interior images from inside that school. Now, we have seen pictures of bodies on the ground inside that building covered in blankets. We're not showing them to you, but you can see the shrapnel damage, the smashed windows outside that school. As I say, the local authorities there claiming that this was as a result of a Russian missile strike. Now, in the capital, Kiev, it has been a defensive posture that has now been adopted. You can see from this still image that defense forces from Ukraine are on a roadway, on a bridge in central Kiev, understandably nervous because we are told that within about 10 to 15 kilometers north of them, in the northern suburbs of Kiev, are the Russian forces trying to push south. And the very latest information is that Hostomel Airport on the outskirts of Kiev, where there was a battle raging throughout yesterday, according to the Russian Defense Ministry, they now have control of that airport. Not verified, but if true, very significant and worrying. This is an apartment block in central Kiev, one of a number of residential areas that suffered damage as Russian missiles apparently came in, struck these buildings or nearby. Now, the Russian Interior Ministry have said that they are not responsible for sending missiles into residential areas of Kiev. They denied that this has anything to do with their missiles, but then again, they denied, of course, that they would ever go and invade Ukraine in the first place, and look what's happened. There is also images we'd like to show you of a downed aircraft. This is also in Kiev, and according to Ukrainian officials, this was a Russian aircraft that was brought down by Ukrainian defense forces. And interestingly, the British government has been supplying shoulder-launched missiles to the Ukrainian military, and today they said that they would be sending more in the way of lethal aid to that country. Not, though, the troops on the ground. This is British troops on the ground going into the Estonian NATO ally. We're told 1,000 British going in there with their tanks and other armoured vehicle. That double the number of British soldiers in Estonia to 2,000. 2 brigades, we're told, and command headquarters. And one of the things that those British personnel, as well as US forces and other NATO allied countries who are sending troops to help bolster the Baltic states to do, to deal with this, the spilling over the Ukrainian borders into their neighbouring countries of refugees. Already Poland, and you're seeing shots there from Poland just across the Ukrainian border, 28,000 refugees at last count had come across the border, 11,000 into Estonia as well. So some real concern about the potential for a very significant humanitarian crisis. Remember, Ukraine itself is a country of 40 million plus, much bigger than Iraq, much bigger than Afghanistan. If there's a humanitarian crisis because of a full-scale war in Ukraine, it will be felt right across Europe.
Mark, thank you. Well, as NATO are currently about to conduct a virtual